Hello everyone, and welcome to this deeply moving account. My brother's blood still stained the wooden floor when my father turned those empty eyes towards me and said I was the only thing left of his family. That's when I understood my real nightmare was only beginning. Those who see me today, always smiling and giving treats to children, can't imagine the story of pain and resilience I carry in my heart. My name is Eleanor Vance Miller, though everyone here in Stonehenge, this little spot in the middle of nowhere in rural West Virginia, knows me as Aunt Ella, the old lady selling homemade pies at the Sunday farmers' market. I'm 84 years old, with hair as white as cotton and hands calloused from decades of hard work. I was born in 1941 in a simple wooden house on a small farm about 5 miles from town. Our property wasn't much, about 30 acres, mostly tough scrubland, but with some good soil for planting corn, beans and potatoes when the rains came at the right time. We also had some cattle, chickens pecking around the yard, and an old mule named Dusty. My father, Thomas Vance, was a hard man of few words and many demands. From an early age, he taught my brother Arthur to work the land and handle the small businesses he ran. These included a roadside stand, a small feed store, and a hardware store in town. Arthur was his pride, his mirror image, his continuation in this world. A man who doesn't leave a son to follow in his footsteps is like a tree without roots, leaves no mark on this world, was what my father always said when he'd had a few whiskies after dinner and started philosophizing about life. My role, as dictated by my mother, Clara, and father, was to help Mama with housework, learn to cook, sew, make soap and preserves. For a woman to have value, she needs to know how to keep a house proper and please her husband. My mother Clara would teach me, always with her head down, agreeing with everything that came from my father. Arthur was 10 years older than me, a handsome young man with an easy smile. Unlike father, he was kind to me, brought candy from town, taught me to whistle and told ghost stories. He promised, "When I inherit all this, I'll take care of you, Eleanor. I'll build you a pretty house with a big porch and a kitchen full of cookware." But fate is a treacherous beast that doesn't respect plans or promises. In 1958, when I was 17 and Arthur was 27, measles swept through our region like a storm. Arthur was one of them. At first it was just a fever, some red spots on his face. "It's nothing," he'd say, stubborn like father, refusing to stay in bed. He kept working at the store, getting rained on, not sleeping well. In 3 days the fever rose so high he began delirious. My father finally agreed to take him to town, but the road was a muddy mess. When we finally reached the clinic, the doctor just shook his head. "This one's got pneumonia on top of the measles. I'll do what I can, but it's bad." 3 days later, Arthur left this world in a stuffy room that smelled of medicine and suffering. He didn't even have the strength to say goodbye properly. He just squeezed my hand, looked into my eyes and whispered, "Take care of Mum, Daddy," and was gone, taking all my father's dreams with him. The funeral was quick. My father didn't shed a single tear, standing like a cement statue, eyes fixed on the hole, swallowing his only son. Mama Clara sobbed quietly, leaning on me. We returned home in a heavy silence that seemed to suffocate even our thoughts. I didn't know yet, but that silence was just the calm before the storm. For a week, father barely left his room, hardly ate, didn't speak to anyone. I would hear him pacing back and forth during the night, occasionally the sound of glass clinking, indicating he was drinking. On the 7th night after the funeral, I woke to a crash. I ran to the living room and found father standing in the middle of the house, the dinner table overturned, plates broken on the floor, and blood streaming from a cut on his hand. "It doesn't make sense anymore," he shouted, his eyes glazed. "Why build? Why work? Why save if I have no one to leave it to?" Mama Clara tried to calm him, saying, "We have the girl, Thomas. We have Eleanor." That's when he turned those empty eyes to me and uttered the phrase that would change my life forever. that one. What's a woman going to do with everything I've built? She'll just hand it over to the first man who comes along? No, Clara, I only have her now, and she'll have to serve a purpose. A chill ran up my spine. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but something inside me warned me I was in danger. In the days that followed, Father began to change. He would look at me strangely during meals, demanding that I learn about the business, accompany him to the store, understand accounts. If you're going to inherit all this, you need to know how to take care of it, he would say. But there was no concern in those words, only contained rage, as if each explanation was an accusation. You're not Arthur. You'll never be. At night he began to drink more than usual, and with the drink came violence. First against objects, then against my mother Clara. A shove here, a slap there, always followed by senseless accusations. It was your fault. You didn't take care of him properly when he was little. You made him weak. Mama Clara would just lower her head and accept it all. 3 weeks after Arthur's funeral, I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of my door creaking. The strong smell of whiskey and sweat immediately alerted me. It was my father, stumbling in the darkness, approaching my bed. "Arthur," he called softly, his voice slurred. "My son." I froze in fear, pretending to be asleep, praying he would realize his mistake. But he sat on the edge of the bed and ran his hand through my hair. "You've come back," he murmured. "I knew you would come back." When I tried to move to say I was Eleanor, not Arthur. He grabbed my arm hard. "No, don't leave again. You're all I have." What happened that dark night was the beginning of a torment that would last almost 2 years, a torment no 17-year-old girl should experience, especially at the hands of someone who should protect her. When the sun rose, my father had already returned to his room, leaving behind a girl broken inside, crying silently. I lay there, wrapped in the blood-stained sheet, ashamed and wishing the earth would swallow me up. It was Mama Clara who came into the room hours later. One look was all it took for her to understand. "He's sick with grief, child," she finally whispered. "Lost his mind with Arthur's death. It will pass." But it didn't pass. That was just the first of many nights when the monster I once called Father would enter my room. Sometimes calling me Arthur, other times knowing very well who I was, saying terrible things, that I had to be good for something, that it was my obligation to replace the son he lost, that I owed him this for raising me. And so began my torment in a house that was once home and had now become a prison, with a man whom grief and whiskey had transformed into a monster, and a mother who, out of fear or helplessness, pretended not to see what was happening under her own roof. The pain of those days still tightens my chest when I remember, even after so many years. The days passed and Father got worse and worse. In the first few weeks, he still pretended when outsiders were around, putting on that mask of the respectable family man. No one suspected what happened when the door closed, and there were just the 3 of us in that isolated house. When Mr. Davison, the owner of the general store, asked if I was going to take over the family business, Father gave a yellow smile. "What does a woman know about business, Mr. Davison? She'll help me until I find a worthy son-in-law, then I'll pass everything to him." Nobody questioned it. It was in July 1958 that Father had his first real breakdown. One morning, Silent Jack, a labourer, reported that he had found part of the crop destroyed. Father turned white as paper, began to shake, and suddenly let out a scream. "It was him! It was Arthur! He's angry with me!" He ran into the plantation, screaming my brother's name. It turned out it was just a herd of wild boars, but in Father's disturbed mind, it was a sign from beyond. After this episode, his madness became increasingly difficult to hide. At the hardware store, he would yell at customers, accuse employees of theft, and see Arthur's shadow everywhere. Customers dwindled. The town pharmacist, Mr. Cooper, prescribed some white pills to calm the nerves. Mama Clara tried to make Father take it secretly in his coffee, but he always suspected. Trying to poison me, woman? Think I don't know what you and your daughter are plotting?" On one of these occasions, he threw the hot coffee in Mama Clara's face. The burn left a red mark that never properly healed. Even so, she continued to protect him. "Sarah, why don't we leave here?" I asked her one night. "And leave your father like this, sick? What will others think? No, girl, a man is a man. We have to endure. God wanted it this way." She paused, then added, "Besides, where would I go with a daughter who's no longer fit to marry?" Those words cut deeper than any belt. Mama Clara knew what happened on the nights when father entered my room. She knew and did nothing. Worse, she thought the shame was mine, not his. In those days, a girl who was no longer a virgin, regardless of the reason, was considered spoiled. I swallowed the tears and the hatred that was beginning to grow inside me. With the town business slowly failing, father began to spend more time at home, which only made things worse. Now I feared not only the nights but the days as well. "You look just like your mother when she was young," he would sometimes say with a look that chilled my soul. "But you have Arthur's determined way. Yes, there's a little piece of him in you. I always knew it." At the end of 1958, I discovered I had a baby growing inside me. For almost 2 months, I hid it as best I could. It was Mama Clara who noticed first. She entered without knocking and stood looking at my belly, which was already beginning to show a small bulge. "How long?" she asked, her voice dry. "About 2 months, I think." "Your father can't know," she finally said. "He'll kill us, kill all 3 of us." It was the first time I saw Mama Clara openly admit that father was dangerous. "And what are we going to do?" I asked. "There's a woman in Coal Hollow, old Mrs. Reed. She takes care of these kinds of problems." My blood froze. I had heard stories about old Mrs. Reed, women who went to her and came back carried, bleeding. "No, Mama, I won't do that. It's my child." "Your child, girl, child of sin, that's what it is, fruit of an abomination," she shouted, losing control. "You want to raise a monster born of this thing that happens between you and your father? Want the child to be born twisted with a tail with horns?" The superstitions of the time were that strong. I just know I won't kill my child before it has a chance to be born. In the weeks that followed, Mama Clara tried everything: pennyroyal tea, cinnamon tea, hot baths, making me jump from stools, carry heavy buckets of water. Nothing worked. Surprisingly, father noticed nothing. He was increasingly lost in his own madness, talking to Arthur as if he were sitting at the table, fighting with invisible enemies. It was on Christmas Eve of 1958 that everything exploded. Father had returned more drunk than usual, carrying a package. He called everyone into the living room, including the 2 employees who still remained on the farm, old Ben and Hannah. "Today is a special day," he announced, staggering. "Today, my son Arthur is going to get a present." He opened the package and took out a pair of new leather boots. "Where is he? Where's my son?" father began to shout. Old Ben tried to calm him, but father grabbed the kerosene lamp that illuminated the room and threw it. The lamp exploded against the wall, the fire spreading rapidly. In a matter of minutes, the room was in flames. We all ran outside except father. It was Hannah who ran back in and pulled father out before the roof collapsed. He came out twisting his singed clothes, his hair burned, but alive. We lost almost everything that night: furniture, clothes, memories, what little money we had saved. We spent the rest of the night in the barn, huddled on the straw. The next morning, looking at the smoking ruins of what had been our home, Mama Clara finally made a decision. "It's over, Thomas," she said, her voice firm. "You need help. We all need help." Father was sitting on a wooden stump, his empty eyes staring at nothing. "We're going to my sister's in Charleston," Mama Clara continued. "There's a real doctor there. There's a hospital." Father just nodded weakly. 2 days later, we were on a rattling bus heading to Charleston, leaving behind the ruins of our previous life and Arthur's grave. What we didn't know was that we were just trading one hell for another. In Charleston, away from the land where he grew up, away from the grave of the son he loved so much, father would get even worse. And I, with a belly growing each day, was more vulnerable than ever. It was there, in that strange city in Aunt Lillian's cramped house, that I learned that sometimes you have to kill a part of yourself to survive. It was there that I began to plan my revenge. Not a revenge of blood or fire, but something much more devastating. Charleston wasn't the paradise Mama Clara promised. Aunt Lillian's house was cramped. We were 4 people squeezed into 2 small rooms. I didn't even have privacy to cry alone. Aunt Lillian was the opposite of Mama Clara. Widowed for years, she ran a small notion shop on her own and had an opinion about everything. She was the first to notice my belly. "Clara, is this girl expecting a child, or am I going blind?" she asked one afternoon. Mama Clara looked at the floor. "Well, yes, my sister. The disgrace is complete." "And who's the father?" Aunt Lillian asked. "She won't say," Mama Clara lied. "One of the farm workers, I think." Aunt Lillian looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see through people. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she didn't believe Mama Clara. The following week, Aunt Lillian came home with a man in a black suit, Dr. Hayes, a real doctor. "Dr. Hayes is going to examine Thomas," she announced. "And then, Eleanor, I don't want anyone sick in my house." Father barely reacted when the doctor examined him. Then it was my turn. Mama Clara tried to stay in the room, but Aunt Lillian was firm. Alone with the doctor, I trembled with fear, but Dr. Hayes was gentle, respectful. "Do you know who the father is?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "How far along are you?" "About 4 months, I think." "And do you want to keep the pregnancy?" The question caught me by surprise. No one had asked me that before. "I do," I answered softly but firmly. He nodded, wrote something, and gave me vitamins. "You're weak, anemic. You need to eat better for the baby." When we left the room, Mama Clara and Aunt Lillian were waiting, tense. Dr. Hayes got straight to the point. "Your husband, Mrs. Vance, has a severe nervous disorder. He needs to be admitted to the sanitarium for proper treatment." "Sanitarium? The madhouse?" Mama Clara repeated, horrified. "Psychiatric hospital is the correct term," the doctor patiently corrected. "He's having delusions, hallucinations, probably triggered by grief, but which can worsen if not treated. As for your daughter," he continued, glancing at me, "she needs prenatal care. She's anemic and malnourished." Aunt Lillian put her hands on her hips, staring at her sister. "Clara, tell me it's not what I'm thinking." Mama Clara collapsed in a chair. "What did you want me to do, Lillian?" "He's my husband, her father." "And that gives him the right to—" Aunt Lillian didn't finish the sentence. "Doctor, what happened to my niece? It's a crime, isn't it?" The doctor looked from one to the other, finally understanding. "If it's what I'm thinking, yes, it's one of the most serious crimes, and I report it." Aunt Lillian continued. "I'll call the police." "You can," the doctor replied hesitantly, "but think about what this will mean for the young lady, for the baby that will be born. This kind of situation usually becomes comment, gossip." "And what do you suggest?" my aunt asked. "The man needs to be institutionalized, that's certain. We can do the hospitalization papers without mentioning the other matter. Just say that he has delusions, that he tried to burn down the house, that he represents a danger to himself and others." And so it was that on a rainy February morning in 1959, 2 men came to get my father. He didn't even resist, so immersed in his own madness that he hardly noticed. He got into the ambulance, looking at the sky, whispering Arthur's name. When the ambulance turned the corner, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I looked at Mama Clara, expecting to see the same relief, but what I saw was a mixture of guilt, shame, and what hurt me most, anger. Anger directed at me. "Satisfied," she whispered when Aunt Lillian went into the house. "Now everyone will know. How could you do this to your own father?" I was speechless. How could she blame me? How could she defend that man after everything he had done? But I soon understood. Mama Clara was a product of an era when women were trained to accept, to be silent, to endure. He raped his own daughter, Mama, I said quietly, using the right word for the first time. And you knew, you let it happen. She slapped me across the face. Never repeat that again. Your father is sick. He doesn't know what he's doing. Aunt Lillian appeared. If you hit her one more time, Clara, it's you who leave this house, not her. It was the beginning of a cold war. Mama Clara barely spoke to me, spent the day crying, visited him at the sanitarium, came back saying he was improving, that he would soon return home. Meanwhile, my belly was growing. Aunt Lillian took me to appointments, bought me fabric, even began to prepare a cradle. To explain my situation to neighbours, she invented a story that I was a widow, that my husband had died in a farm accident. It was during one of these appointments, already in the 6th month, that Dr. Hayes gave me news that changed everything. Miss Eleanor, you are expecting twins. I almost fell off the chair. Twins? 2 children to raise alone? Absolutely, he confirmed. You can hear 2 distinct little heartbeats. I left the office dazed. Aunt Lillian, waiting, immediately asked, "It's 2, Auntie, 2 babies." She widened her eyes, made the sign of the cross, and then, to my surprise, opened a smile. "God knows what he's doing, girl. It will be difficult, but we'll manage." That night, lying in the narrow bed I shared with Mama Clara, I felt the babies moving for the first time. It wasn't that weak tremor I had already felt before. These were kicks, punches, complete somersaults. I cried silently, my hands on my belly, feeling my children alive, strong despite everything. At that moment I made a decision. These children would never know the truth about how they were conceived. They would never carry the weight of that knowledge. I would invent a father for them, a good, hard-working man who had died before meeting them, a merciful lie to protect them. Mama Clara, whom I thought was asleep, suddenly spoke. "What are you going to do when these children are born, Eleanor? How will you raise them? With what money?" "I don't know, Mamma. I just know they're my children and I'll love them." "And when your father comes back, what will you say to him?" I felt a shiver down my spine. "He won't come back, Mamma, not to my life, never again." She finally turned, her eyes shining. "He is your father, Eleanor. His blood runs in your veins, in the veins of these children. There's no escape from that." Her words haunted me. "Nonsense," Aunt Lillian said when I shared my fears. "Blood curse is ignorant people's talk. What makes a person is character, choices, not blood. Look at me and your mother. Same parents, same upbringing, and we're as different as water and oil." At the end of July 1959, I felt the first contractions. Mama Clara wasn't home. She was at the sanitarium with Father. Aunt Lillian had already arranged everything with an experienced midwife, Mrs. Costello. "It's going to be a difficult birth, girl," she warned. "There are 2 and they're coming a bit sideways. You'll need strength." The 16 hours of labour were the hardest of my life, but when I finally heard the cry of the first baby, followed minutes later by the second, it was all worth it. "2 boys," announced Mrs. Costello, placing the little ones wrapped in clean towels in my arms, strong as bulls. I looked at those red, wrinkled, perfect faces and saw no shadow of my father in them, just new, pure life. "What will you name them?" asked Aunt Lillian. I hadn't thought of names for boys. "David and Jonathan," I replied, without thinking much. Bible names that meant God with us and heard by God. Because despite everything, I still wanted to believe that God hadn't completely abandoned me. In the days following the twins' birth, a strange peace settled in me, as if I finally understood that the brutal life I had lived until then had a purpose, to bring these 2 beings into the world, to care for them, protect them, love them. It was also when the idea of revenge began to grow in me. Not a violent, bloody revenge, but something more subtle, more definitive, something that would free not only me, but also my mother and my children from the yoke of that man. The first months with the twins were a challenge. Sleepless nights, constant crying, cloth diapers, cracked breasts. But unlike the pains I carried before, these were pains that brought purpose. Aunt Lillian was an angel during this time. Mama Clara returned from the sanitarium 3 weeks after the twins' birth. "How is father?" I asked. "Worse," she responded. "The doctors say there's no more hope, that he'll be institutionalized for the rest of his life." I felt such great relief I was ashamed. "Did the doctor say anything else?" asked Aunt Lillian. Mama Clara hesitated. "They said he has a disease in his brain that gets progressively worse, that one day he won't recognize anyone anymore or be able to take care of himself." Years later, I discovered that it was probably general paresis, a neurological complication of advanced stage syphilis, a disease he must have contracted in his wanderings through the region's brothels, and which, untreated for years, ended up affecting his brain, contributing to the madness that had been fermenting in him since Arthur's death. In those first months of 1960, I began to think about the future. I couldn't continue depending on Aunt Lillian's charity. I needed to work. An opportunity arose at the city hospital as a nursing assistant. The work was hard and paid little, but they offered a small room for employees. Aunt Lillian encouraged me, but Mama Clara was horrified. "Working in the hospital with sick people? That's not work for a family girl." "And what do you suggest, Mamma? That I remain dependent on Aunt Lillian, or that I hastily find a husband to support not only me, but also 2 children who aren't even his?" She didn't respond, but I realized I had touched on a sensitive point. I got the job. It was difficult at first, but I soon discovered I had a knack for it. In 6 months I had already been promoted. Nurse Evelyn, one of the head nurses, took me under her protection. "You have a gift, girl," she would say. "You could be a real nurse with a diploma." The idea was planted in my head, but it still seemed too distant a dream. The twins turned 1-year-old, filling the house with joy. Even Mama Clara began to grow attached. I saw her once cradling Jonathan, singing softly a lullaby, and I felt a tightness in my chest. Despite everything, she was still my mother. It was during this time that I met William, a young pharmacist who had opened a small pharmacy near the hospital. We started talking. He was an educated, gentle man. Soon we were having dates. He knew about my situation, that I was a widow with 2 small children, and didn't seem to mind. "I admire your courage," he told me once. For a moment I allowed myself to dream. Maybe he was the fresh start I had been waiting for, but fate once again had other plans. On a cold May morning in 1961, I was called urgently to the ward. A new patient had arrived, Mama Clara. Pale as wax, bluish lips, breathing with difficulty. "Heart problem," they said. I ran to her side. "Mama, it's me, Eleanor. Can you hear me?" She opened her eyes. "Eleanor, forgive me. I need to tell you. Your father, he isn't—" She didn't finish the sentence. Her entire body shook in a violent convulsion, and then she was still. She died of a sudden, massive heart attack. "Your father, he isn't what?" The incomplete phrase would haunt me for months, years. The funeral was simple, as Arthur's had been, except this time it was raining. After Mama Clara's death, something changed inside me. Now it was just me, my children, and whatever future we could build. And of course, one last matter to resolve. My father still institutionalized, still a shadow hanging over our lives. Aunt Lillian called me for a serious conversation a week after the funeral. "Eleanor, there's something your mother asked me to tell you if anything happened to her." My heart raced. "It's about your father," she continued. "About what he did to you. You already know about that, Auntie." "It's not that. It's about who he really is. George is not your biological father, Eleanor." It was as if the ground had disappeared from beneath my feet. "What do you mean? Of course he is. Mama never—" "Your mother was 16 when she met a young man from the city, a law student. They fell in love. When your mother discovered she was pregnant, the young man had already returned. Her family arranged a hasty marriage with Thomas, who was a foreman on the neighbouring farm and had an interest in the land my father would leave as inheritance. He agreed to marry her, knowing Mama Clara was pregnant by another man, on the condition that no one would ever know the truth, that the child, me, would be registered as his daughter. And my real father, did he never know about me? Aunt Lillian shook her head. Your mother tried to contact him, never got a response. Years later we learned he had married a girl from a good family, become a judge. Why had Mama never told me? I asked. Aunt Lillian held my hands. I think it was shame, my child, and fear. Fear that you would blame her for hiding this. And then when Thomas did what he did, I think she became even more afraid that you would think she had let it happen because he wasn't your real father. Suddenly, everything made a new terrible sense. Father's hateful look when I was born a girl, his obsession with Arthur, his only real son, the ease with which he crossed that forbidden line, violating the daughter he never truly considered his own. And Mama Clara, her silence, her guilt, her inability to protect me, everything now had a new layer of meaning. It wasn't just fear of a violent husband, it was fear that a secret kept for decades would come to light. That night, alone, I cried all the tears I still had to cry. When the sun rose, an idea had formed in my head. An idea so perfect, so just, so deliciously vindictive. The revenge I had dreamed of for so long was now within my reach. To execute it, I would need help, William, the young pharmacist. What I didn't know was that my revenge would end up taking a turn that I couldn't have imagined, and that the price to pay would be much higher than I was prepared to accept. The revelation that Thomas was not my biological father changed everything. Why he always favoured Arthur, why he looked at me with disguised anger, why he crossed that unforgivable line so easily. In his sick mind, I wasn't really his daughter. I was just the living proof of my mother's betrayal, an intruder. My plan for revenge was born from this revelation. It wouldn't be bloody. It would be something more sophisticated, something that would take from him the only thing that still mattered: his name, his inheritance, his legacy. William and I grew closer. When I finally told him my whole story, I expected disgust, but what I saw was compassion and a righteous anger. This man needs to pay for what he did, William said, not just to you, but to your mother, to the children. He's already paying, I replied, but it's not enough. I want him to know he completely failed, that he left nothing in this world. William immediately understood. As a pharmacist, he knew doctors, lawyers, and so we began our journey to legally destroy the man who had destroyed my childhood. The first step was to find a lawyer in Richmond, Mr. Blackwood, a childhood friend of William's. I want to change my name and my children's names. I don't want anything from that man. Not the surname, not the land, not a penny of the money. I want it to be as if we never existed for him. Mr. Blackwood explained it would be complicated. We would need to prove George was not my biological father, which without a paternity test would be almost impossible. We would have to prove the abuse, exposing the whole story in court. Are you sure you want to go through this, Miss Eleanor? It will be painful, and the children, one day they'll grow up, ask questions. I'm sure, I replied. I prefer that my children know the truth when they're old enough to understand, rather than grow up carrying the name of a monster. While we prepared the legal process, I continued working at the hospital. It was there that I met Dr. Peterson, a young doctor who came to work in the psychiatric ward. One afternoon I mentioned that my father was institutionalized in a sanitarium in Charleston. What a coincidence, he said. I'm visiting that sanitarium next week. What's his name? Thomas Vance, but he's not my father. Not really. I told the whole story. If I may be so bold, Miss Eleanor, I think I can help with your legal process. It would be useful to have an updated medical report on Mr. Vance's mental state. I can do this assessment. It was as if fate was conspiring in my favour. A week later, Dr. Peterson returned from the sanitarium with news that exceeded all expectations. Mr. Vance is in an advanced state of paralytic dementia, probably caused by untreated syphilis. He barely recognizes where he is, confuses people, has constant delusions. According to the nurses, he calls for Arthur all the time. Did he ask about me or my mother? The doctor hesitated. Actually, he doesn't remember you. When I mentioned your name, he asked who that was. When I explained you were his daughter, he became agitated, said he never had a daughter, only a son named Arthur. That hurt more than I expected. Being completely forgotten seemed worse somehow, but Dr. Peterson's report was crucial. With the medical certification that Thomas was permanently mentally incapacitated, we were able to move forward with the name change request without needing his consent. In September 1962, I finally received the news. The judge had granted my request. My children and I could adopt a new surname. I chose Miller, William's surname. Eleanor Miller, I repeated to myself, savouring each syllable, David and Jonathan Miller. It sounded good, sounded clean, new, without the weight of the bloody history we carried before. But my revenge wouldn't be complete with just that. There was still the matter of the land, the material inheritance that Thomas valued so much. A part of me just wanted to give it all up, but William, always practical, made me see that those lands could mean a better future for my children. With Mr. Blackwood's help, we filed a process for the lands to be divided. One part, where the house and Arthur's grave were, we sold to pay for Thomas's medical and hospitalisation expenses. The rest would be held for my children. In November 1962, news arrived that would put the final period on this story. Thomas had died in the sanitarium, victim of pneumonia. He died alone, without family at his side, calling for a son who was no longer among the living. I didn't go to the funeral. I only sent a wreath of flowers without a card. A few months later, William asked me to marry him. I married William on a Sunday in April 1963 in a simple ceremony. Aunt Lillian was the only family present on my side. David and Jonathan, almost 4 years old, were the page boys. 2 weeks later we left for Louisville, where William had received an offer to manage a larger pharmacy. It was the chance to start over in a place where no one knew our history, where we could just be a normal family. I never returned to West Virginia. I learned through letters from Aunt Lillian that the lands were sold, that the house gradually fell down. Even Arthur's grave ended up lost when the new owner decided to tear down the fences. The years passed. William was a wonderful father to David and Jonathan, who grew up calling him Dad without ever questioning. When they turned 12, I thought it was time to tell them the truth. Not all of it, but a softened version, that their biological father had been a sick man who did bad things, who couldn't care for them. That William chose them as children of his heart, which was even more special than being a father by blood. They accepted it with surprising naturalness. "So, we have 2 fathers?" asked David. "One who made us and one who raised us." I nodded. "I prefer the one who raised us," concluded Jonathan, going back to playing. In 1975, Aunt Lillian passed away at the age of 84. She was the last connection I had to my past. With her departure, I felt that a chapter was finally closing. I made an important decision that year. I went back to school, realising the old dream of becoming a qualified nurse. William supported me as always. In 1978, at the age of 37, I finally received my diploma. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Life followed its course. The boys grew up, graduated. David became an engineer. Jonathan followed William's footsteps and became a pharmacist. Both married, gave me grandchildren who became the joy of my old age. William and I built a quiet life based on respect and companionship. In 1993, I lost William to a devastating cancer. It was an immense pain, but different from others I had felt. It was a clean pain without guilt, without regrets. We had lived well, loved well, built something good together. Today, at 84 years old, looking back, I see that my revenge was more complete than I could have imagined. I didn't need to lift a finger against Thomas. Life itself took care of punishing him, with the disease he himself sought in his escapades, with the loneliness of his last days, with the forgetfulness that covered his name and memory. He wanted so badly to leave a legacy, to have his name perpetuated through a son. In the end, his name died with him. His biological grandchildren, the children of the daughter he despised because he believed she wasn't his, carry another surname, call another man father, built brilliant lives without ever knowing the evil that carried in the blood running through their veins. If there is justice in this world, this was it. Not in the direct bloody revenge I dreamed of so many times when I was young, but in the complete erasure of a man who thought his name and his blood were so important. My name is Eleanor